My mother-in-law claimed my salary 57 days into my marriage. My husband didn't defend me, he just asked if I earned more than him. He had no idea. The coffee mug was a wedding gift. White ceramic, hand-thrown, with a small imperfection on the rim where the clay had pulled slightly during firing. I remember thinking when I unwrapped it that it was the most honest gift we'd received. Beautiful, but not pretending to be perfect. I remember thinking that was a good sign. I was holding that mug when my mother-in-law told me my salary belonged to her family. She said it the way people announce things that have already been decided in rooms you weren't invited to. No preamble, no softening. Just Roberta Haynes, sitting in my armchair, the one I'd had since grad school, the one I'd reupholstered myself with a dark green fabric I found at an estate sale in Asheville, sitting in it like she'd always owned it, folding her hands in her lap and saying, "Your salary will go into our account from now on." 57 days into my marriage. I set the mug down slowly, felt the ceramic click against the granite countertop, felt the air in the kitchen change, and then I smiled. Not the smile I give clients when they've underestimated what I already know. Something quieter than that. Something I kept mostly for myself. "That won't be necessary," I said. "I earn more than all of you combined." The silence that followed had physical weight. And then my husband, Daniel Robert Haynes, the man I had dated for 18 months, been engaged to for 8, and married 57 days ago, turned the color of old printer paper and whispered 4 words that told me everything I needed to know about the next chapter of my life. "Do you earn more than me?" Not, "Mom, that's out of line." Not, "Roberta, this isn't your business." Not even surprise at the audacity of what she'd said, just fear. Pure, unguarded, revealing fear that I had more than him. I looked at my husband's face. I looked at my mother-in-law's face. I looked at the armchair that had my name on it, in a house that had my name on the mortgage, and I understood, with the particular clarity that comes from being very good at finding things people try to hide, exactly what I had walked into. I picked up my coffee mug, took a sip. "I need to make a call," I said. I walked upstairs, closed the bedroom door, and opened a spreadsheet. I named it Home Records, and I began. "My name is Margot Elise Okafor Webb." I kept my name professionally, which should have been my first data point. It was 2021 when I married Daniel, which meant I had been a forensic financial analyst for 9 years, had my CFE certification, had testified as an expert witness in 11 cases, and had recovered or documented a combined $34 million in hidden, misappropriated, or fraudulently transferred assets for clients ranging from divorce attorneys to the North Carolina Department of Revenue. My job, in plain language, is finding money that people try to hide. I am exceptionally good at it. I grew up in Durham, the daughter of a tax attorney and a high school math teacher, which means I was raised understanding 2 things: that numbers don't lie, and that the people presenting them often do. I got my undergraduate degree in accounting from NC State, my master's in forensic accounting from Georgetown, and I spent my first 3 years out of school at a Big 4 firm learning how companies structured their reporting in ways that were technically legal and functionally deceptive. Then I went independent, built a client list, built a reputation. By the time I married Daniel, I was billing $380 an hour, carried no debt except the mortgage on a house I'd bought in the Plaza Midwood neighborhood of Charlotte, drove a 2022 Volvo XC60 that I'd paid cash for, and had a retirement account that my financial advisor, Patricia Wynn, described as aggressively healthy. Daniel knew I worked in finance. He knew I had my CFE. He knew I was, as he said once on our 3rd date, clearly very good at what you do. He had never once asked what I made. Not in 18 months of dating, not in the 8 months of our engagement, not in 57 days of marriage. He just assumed. And the assumption, I would later understand, was that I made less than him. Maybe comfortably, maybe significantly, but less. Because Daniel made good money. His LLC, Haynes Consulting Group, pulled in real revenue. He drove a BMW 5 Series and wore good suits and talked about money with the confidence of someone who'd never had to account for it carefully. He assumed I was successful in the way women in finance are often assumed to be successful. Competently, supportively, in a register slightly below the men around them. It had never occurred to him to check. That assumption was the architecture everything else was built on. And now I had a spreadsheet open and a mother-in-law downstairs who had just told me, 57 days into my marriage, that my income was a resource to be managed by people other than me. I started with February. February had been the first thing I noticed, though I'd told myself it was nothing. A $4,000 transfer from our joint account, the one we'd opened together for household expenses, utilities, groceries, the practical machinery of a shared life. No memo, no explanation. I'd asked Daniel about it once, casually, over dinner. "Just moving some things around," he said. "I'll sort it out." I wrote it in the spreadsheet. Feb 14, $4,000. Joint to unknown. No explanation provided. I told myself it was nothing. March was harder to explain away. A credit card statement arrived in the mail addressed to Daniel. This wasn't unusual. He had his own cards, his own accounts. The ordinary financial financial infrastructure of an adult who'd been managing his own money before we met. But the statement was from an issuer I didn't recognize, and when I picked it up, I wasn't snooping, it was on the kitchen counter with the rest of the mail. I saw the balance window through the envelope's plastic panel. $22,000. I set it down, picked it up again. I steamed it open over the kettle. I know how that sounds, but I am a forensic financial analyst, and something in my hindbrain had been running calculations since February, and sometimes the professional instinct overrides the polite one. The statement was 11 pages. I photographed every page with my phone, in order, in good light, in under 4 minutes. Then I resealed it with a dab of a glue stick and set it back on the counter exactly where I'd found it. The charges were itemized. Hotel stays, not business hotels, boutique properties, restaurant meals at places I'd never heard of in cities where Daniel had told me he had client meetings, and a recurring monthly charge, $340, to something called Sweet Stay Preferred. I ran the name that night from my laptop. Sweet Stay Preferred was a membership program for extended stay accommodations, boutique apartment hotels, the kind of place where you book by the month, not the night. The kind of place that issues a key fob and a parking pass and a little welcome packet with the Wi-Fi password and the pool hours. The kind of place where you'd stay if you needed somewhere that wasn't your home. I added 11 pages of photographed statements to the home records folder on my encrypted drive. I slept fine. I want to be clear about that. I've been asked since by people who found out the timeline how I was sleeping during all of this. I slept fine. When you are trained to find concealed assets, you learn to separate the emotional register from the investigative one. You look at what's in front of you. You document it. You move to the next thing. You don't panic until you have enough data to understand what you're actually panicking about. April gave me more data. Roberta came to stay in April. This was, I was told, a normal thing. She visited for a week or two every few months, had done so since Daniel bought the house before we were together, had a guest room she thought of as hers. I had understood this going in. I had been prepared to be a good daughter-in-law. I had bought her preferred brand of herbal tea and put extra towels in the guest room and genuinely, earnestly tried. What I hadn't been prepared for was the way the energy in the house changed when she arrived. Daniel became quieter, more careful. He moved through rooms differently when she was there. Not tense exactly, but calibrated, like a man who'd been recalibrated. He deferred to her in small ways that accumulated into something I couldn't name but kept noticing: which chair he sat in at the dinner table, which topics he chose to raise and which ones he let drop, the way he looked at her before he answered certain questions. I told myself it was a close family dynamic. Some families were like that. I was close with my mother too. Then, on a Wednesday evening, I came back from the grocery store to find them in the living room, with the volume of their conversation lowered. Not stopped, lowered. The particular drop in register that people use when they're in the middle of something they want to finish before being interrupted. I put the bags on the kitchen counter, moved quietly. The kitchen door was open 2 inches. "What does Margot think we have?" Roberta asked. I stood in the hallway with a bag of lemons in my hand and felt the question settle into me like a stone into still water. What does Margot think we have? Not, what does Margot know about the business? Not, has Margot asked about the finances? What does she think? Past tense of a performance, the framing of someone managing a perception. I walked into the kitchen and started unpacking groceries. Daniel came in 5 minutes later, poured himself a glass of water, kissed me on the cheek, and asked how the store was. "Fine," I said. "Busy." "Good," he said. That night, I added a new tab to my spreadsheet. I called it Questions. The first entry read, "What do they have that they don't want me to know about?" I called Deja in June. Deja Washington had been my friend since our junior year at NC State, when we were both staying late in the library on a Thursday night, and she offered me half of her Subway sandwich because she'd heard my stomach growl from 2 tables over. She was now a family law attorney with Washington and Pruitt LLP in Charlotte, 12 years of practice, a particular specialty in high-asset divorce litigation, and a reputation among the attorneys I occasionally worked with as someone you did not want across the table from you if you had anything to hide. I drove to her office on a Tuesday morning and put a folder on the table between us. It had 47 pages in it, photographed statements, printed transaction records from our joint account, a timeline I'd built in a separate spreadsheet cross-referencing Daniel's stated travel schedule with the hotel charges on the mystery credit card, a list of 6 questions I hadn't been able to answer yet. Deja looked at the folder for a long moment, then at me. "How long have you been documenting this?" "Since February." She opened the folder, read in silence for 4 minutes. "I know because I was watching the clock on her wall." "This is enough to start," she said. "Not yet," I said. "I want all of it." She looked at me over the top of the folder. "Margot, I know what I'm doing," I said. "Give me 90 days." She knew better than to argue argue with me about documentation. She'd hired me twice as a consulting analyst on her own cases. She understood how I worked. 90 days, she said. Then we talk about timing. I drove home and called Marcus. Marcus Tyndall had been a forensic accountant for 19 years, first with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, then with a boutique firm in Raleigh that specialized in exactly the kind of work I was about to need done. I'd worked with him on 4 cases. He was meticulous, methodical, and had a gift for finding the thread in a financial structure that, when pulled, unraveled everything else. I explained the situation in clinical terms, the way I would explain a client case. Hidden asset investigation, target, 1 individual, and potentially 1 related party. Starting documentation package, 47 pages. Send me what you have, Marcus said. Give me 2 weeks for an initial assessment. He came back in 11 days. We sat in his Raleigh office, a quiet room, 2nd floor, the windows overlooking a parking deck, and he walked me through what he'd found with the particular calm of someone who has seen financial deception in enough of its forms to have stopped being surprised by any of them. Haynes Consulting Group had earned $238,000 in the year before our wedding. Daniel's personal accounts, which I had some visibility into through our joint filing, reflected $91,000 of that. The remaining $87,000 had been moved, in transfers averaging $7,000 to $9,000 each over the course of 11 months, to a savings account in Greensboro, North Carolina, 31 minutes from Roberta Haynes's house. The Greensboro account had been opened in 2019. The backup contact on the account, the person authorized to access it in case of emergency, the name you give when you want someone else to be able to get to your money, was Roberta Ann Haynes. I sat with that for a moment. Then Marcus turned to the next page. The property had taken more digging. It was structured through a holding company, Haynes Family Properties, LLC, registered in Delaware in 2018, with a registered agent address that was a law firm in Wilmington that specialized in exactly the kind of anonymous business registration that people use when they want distance between themselves and an asset. But Marcus had 19 years of experience finding threads. The LLC owned a commercial building in Kannapolis, North Carolina, a strip property, 4 tenant bays, 2 currently leased to a nail salon and an insurance office. The LLC was co-owned equally by 2 members, Daniel Robert Haynes and Roberta Ann Haynes. The property generated $4,800 a month in rental income, distributed to the LLC and from there to its members. Not 1 cent of it had been disclosed in Daniel's financial representations during our marriage. Not 1 cent of it had appeared on any of the documents he'd shown me when we were discussing our combined financial picture before the wedding. I sat at Marcus's conference table looking at a 17-page report documenting, in precise, accountant-measured detail, the architecture of what my marriage actually was. Not a partnership, a funding arrangement. I was meant to bring my income into a household that was secretly extracting wealth to a parallel structure controlled by Daniel and his mother. My salary, as Roberta had said 57 days into the marriage, before she knew what my salary actually was supposed to go into their account. I had been selected, evaluated, determined to be a good source. I thought about Roberta in my armchair. I thought about Daniel's pale face and his 4 words. I thought about the cracked kitchen door and what does Margot think we have. My hands were very still on the conference table. I want to be accurate about that. I've been asked since whether I cried, whether I fell apart, whether the room swam. None of that happened. My hands were still. My breathing was even. What I felt sitting there was something close to professional recognition. The specific, cold clarity of a moment when you've suspected the shape of a hidden structure and the documentation finally confirms it exactly. Marcus, I said, I need 2 copies of this report. 1 for my attorney, 1 for a safe deposit box. Already printed, he said. I drove back to Charlotte, stopped at a Thai place I liked on Central Avenue, ordered the massaman curry and ate it alone at a table by the window and watched the street outside. I had 90 days of documentation, 17 pages of forensic accounting, and a folder that was about to become 31 pages of the most precisely organized divorce filing Deja Washington had ever assembled. But first, I had to wait, because there was one more thing I needed. The crisis came in October. I hadn't expected it to come from the direction it did. I'd been monitoring the joint account, watching the LLC documentation, tracking what Marcus and I had now cataloged as 9 separate transfers since the wedding, totaling $31,400 moved from accounts I had partial visibility into to accounts I didn't. I had been patient, strategic, a woman building a case. What I hadn't been watching was my own company's name. On a Thursday morning in October, I got a call from Patricia Wynn, my financial advisor, 21 years in wealth management, a client list that included 4 of the 15 wealthiest households in Mecklenburg County. She called at 8:16 a.m., which was early for Patricia, which meant something was wrong. Margot, she said, has anyone contacted you about your brokerage accounts? No. Why? A pause that was 3 seconds too long. Someone called yesterday, claimed to be your husband, said you'd authorized him to request account information, holdings, accounts, balances, beneficiary structures. The representative he spoke with followed protocol and didn't release anything, but the call was logged and it triggered an alert to me. My stomach dropped through the floor, not out of fear, out of calculation, because I knew exactly what that call meant. Daniel, or Roberta, or someone they'd retained, had started their own documentation process. They were trying to get a picture of my assets before I filed. They were trying to understand what they were dealing with, which meant they were planning something, which meant my 90-day window had just closed. Patricia, I said, lock everything. No access authorizations without written consent from me personally. And log this call. Already done, she said. I called you first. I hung up and called Deja before I'd even put my coffee down. We're filing in January, I said. That's 3 months. I know the timing. I want him served at his office. A pause. Margot, at his desk, with his colleagues in the next room, on a Monday morning. She wrote it down. The next 3 months were the longest of my life, not because I was afraid, but because patience when you understand the full shape of what's been done to you is a particular kind of sustained discipline. I went to work. I billed my hours. I came home to a marriage I now understood completely and performed my role in it with the same precise, controlled energy I brought to any investigation I was about to close. Daniel never mentioned the call to Patricia. He never mentioned anything had changed. He didn't know I knew. That, in the end, was his most expensive mistake. I signed the divorce papers on January 2nd, 31 pages, tabbed, annotated, documented to the penny with citations to the forensic accounting report. Marcus had now expanded to 38 pages. Deja had organized it into 4 sections: hidden assets, fraudulent omission, financial bad faith during the marriage, and a proposed equitable distribution that reflected the full picture of what Daniel had concealed. It was, Deja told me when we went through the final draft together, the cleanest filing she'd seen in 12 years of family law practice. It's thorough, I said. It's airtight, she said. Whatever his attorney tries, they won't find a crack, I said. I built it. We filed on January 8th at 11:42 a.m. On a Monday morning, January 11th, gray Charlotte winter, the kind of day where the sky is the same color as the sidewalk. Deja's process server, a man named Roy, who had been doing this for 20 years and had the particular unreadable expression of someone who delivered news for a living, walked into the offices of Haynes Consulting Group on South Tryon Street, asked the receptionist for Daniel Haynes, and when Daniel came out from his office, curious, not worried, not yet, handed him a sealed envelope. Roy told me later that Daniel had held the envelope for a moment without opening it, that he'd looked at the return address, that something had changed in his face. Not dramatic, not a collapse, just a quiet displacement, like a piece of furniture that had been moved an inch from where it was supposed to be. He opened it standing in his own reception area. Roy was back in his car before Daniel had finished the first page. My phone rang 22 minutes later. I looked at the screen, set it face down on my desk, went back to the Watkins case I was working, a business valuation dispute for a company in Greensboro, ironically, that I was due to file an expert report on by Friday. I let the call go to voicemail. He called twice more before noon. I let both go. That evening I heard his key in the lock at 6:47 p.m. I was at the stove making pasta. I had opened a good bottle of wine, a Barolo I'd been saving, a 2016 from a small producer in Piedmont that I'd bought at auction 2 years ago, and been meaning to open for the right occasion. This seemed like the right occasion. He stood in the kitchen doorway for a long moment. The envelope was in his hand. Still, he'd been carrying it all day. Where did you get all of this? I stirred the pasta. I found it. Margot. I'm a forensic financial analyst, Daniel. I turned to look at him. I find things people try to hide. You knew that about me when you married me. He stared at me. His face had the quality of something evacuated, like the expression he usually wore had been removed and nothing had been put back in its place yet. A lot of this isn't what it looks like. All 31 pages, silence. The LLC is documented. The Greensboro account is documented. The property in Kannapolis is documented. The transfers are documented. Marcus Tyndall spent 4 months on this. He's testified as an expert witness 43 times. His report will hold up. I turned back to the stove. You're welcome to have your attorney review it. Where am I supposed to go? I took a breath, kept my voice even. I believe there's a commercial property in Kannapolis generating $4,800 a month in rental income, co-owned by you and your mother. I plated the pasta, poured my wine. I'm sure she can help. I heard him stand in the doorway for another moment. Then I heard the front door. Then I heard his car. Then the house was quiet, and the Barolo was very good, and I sat at the kitchen table that I'd bought at an estate sale in Dilworth 3 years before I ever met Daniel Haynes, and I ate my dinner in the particular piece of someone who has been patient for a very long time and has finally completely done what needed to be done. Roberta's attorney called Deja the next morning at 9:03 a.m. Deja picked up on the first ring. That was intentional. I'd asked her to. The attorney, a man named Clifton Prudhomme who specialized, per his firm's website, in family asset protection, which is a phrase that means different things depending on which side of a dispute you're on, had apparently been retained the previous evening. He was, Deja told me me afterward, prepared for a negotiation. He was not prepared for 38 pages of forensic accounting. He asked for 2 weeks to review the documentation. Deja gave him 10 days. He came back wanting to discuss certain characterizations of the Haynes Family Properties LLC. Deja walked him through Marcus's methodology with the patience of someone who had read every page 15 times and could answer any question about any line item from memory. The discovery phase lasted 6 weeks. Daniel's attorney, a different attorney from a larger firm who'd been brought in after Clifton apparently communicated the scope of what they were dealing with, issued 17 interrogatories. Deja and I answered everyone with documentation, every single one. In March, Roberta's attorney filed a motion to limit the scope of the equitable distribution claim as it related to the LLC, arguing that the property predated the marriage and was therefore separate property, not subject to division. Marcus filed a supplemental report demonstrating that 2 of the tenant improvements on the Kannapolis property, totaling $31,200 in work done in 2022, had been funded through transfers from the joint marital account. The motion was denied. In April, Daniel's team proposed a settlement. It was, as these things go, ambitious in its assessment of what I might accept. Deja sent back a counteroffer. They went back and forth twice. The final settlement was reached on a Wednesday afternoon in April. I was in my office when Deja called. I was working on a new case, a pension fund audit for a manufacturing company in Concord. Nothing glamorous, exactly the kind of thing I loved. I answered on the second ring. Deja read me the numbers. I wrote them down, though I didn't need to. I remembered numbers. Then I said, "Is Roberta included?" "Yes," Deja said. "Her name is on the LLC. She's a party to the asset disclosure. The settlement covers her exposure." I thought about the armchair. I thought about their account. I thought about a woman who had looked at me, a forensic financial analyst with 9 years of experience finding exactly this kind of thing, and decided I was a resource to be managed. "Good," I said. "There's one more thing," Deja said. "Tell me." His attorney asked, as a condition of settlement, that you not discuss the forensic findings publicly. I was quiet for a moment. "Margot," Deja said carefully, "I'm thinking. I know it's reasonable," I said. "I just want to think about it for a second." I thought about it. I thought about 12 years of building a professional reputation that could speak for itself. I thought about Marcus's report, which would become part of the court record regardless. I thought about the fact that I didn't need to say anything publicly because the document said everything that needed to be said, in language more precise and more permanent than anything I could put in a social media post. "Tell them yes," I said, "with one condition." "What condition?" "The armchair," I said. "In the living room. Green upholstery. It was mine before the marriage. I want it specifically named in the property division." There was a pause. "Margot," Deja said, and I could hear her smiling, "I will make it Exhibit A." 6 months later. It's September now. Charlotte in September is still warm. That particular southern warmth that feels earned because you know it won't last. I have the windows open in the mornings and drink my coffee standing up looking at the yard. The house is mine. It always was, technically. My name was always on the mortgage. My credit score always the one that made it possible. But it's mine now in the way that things are yours, when they're not subject to anyone else's claim on them. When you stop managing a perception and start just living. Patricia Wynn adjusted my investment allocations after the settlement. She called it rebalancing, which is the word financial advisors use when what they mean is now we can do this properly. My retirement account is doing things that make her write me emails with a lot of exclamation points, which from Patricia is the equivalent of a standing ovation. Marcus closed out the file and sent me a final invoice with a handwritten note. One of the cleanest documentation packages I've ever worked with. MT, I had it framed. It's in my office next to my CFE certificate. Deja and I have dinner every month or so. She told me last week that Clifton Prudhomme, Roberta's attorney, had called her after the settlement to say, off the record, that in 20 years of practice, he'd never seen a financial disclosure package assembled with that level of precision. She told him I had 9 years of experience finding things people tried to hide. He said, "I know. That's what I told my client." "And what did she say?" Deja asked. He paused. "She said she should have asked more questions." I think about that sometimes. I think about all the questions that went unasked. 18 months of dating and 8 months of engagement, and Daniel never once asked what I made because he'd decided he already knew. He'd built an entire architecture. The hidden account, the LLC, the plan to consolidate my income into a structure his mother controlled, on an assumption he'd never bothered to verify. He assumed I earned less than him. He assumed I was the kind of woman who would not look too closely. He assumed the armchair in the living room was his family's before he'd ever checked who owned it. I am a forensic financial analyst. My job is finding money people try to hide. He knew that about me when he married me. He just never thought to apply it to himself. The armchair is in the corner of my living room where it's always been. The green upholstery is starting to show wear on the right armrest. I'll need to reupholster it again in a year or two. I'm thinking a deeper color this time. Something like navy, or maybe a dark plum. I'll find the fabric at an estate sale somewhere. I'm good at finding things.